Hello, I'm Ed Gallagher, President of the American Scandinavian Foundation and Scandinavia House, and I'm pleased to present this virtual webinar, Young Children and Teachers Experiences Through COVID, which we have organized in cooperation with the Child Development Institute of Sarah Lawrence College. In this program, teachers from Scandinavia and the United States will discuss their experiences teaching in very different environments during the pandemic, ranging from a forest school in Denmark to a New York City public school to a small private school in Westchester County. What were the challenges? What have we learned from all of this? This program has been generously supported by the Heimbold Foundation thanks to ASF Executive Trustee Monica Heimbold. Now it is my pleasure to invite the President of Sarah Lawrence College, Crystal Collins-Judd, to say a few words. Crystal?
Good morning and welcome. I'm Crystal Collins-Judd, the President of Sarah Lawrence, and I'm delighted to add my voice to Ed Gallagher's as we welcome you to this morning's collaboration between the American Scandinavian Foundation and the Child Development Institute at Sarah Lawrence. This collaboration stems from a relationship between two wonderful Sarah Lawrence alumni, Monica Heimbold and Sarah Wilford. Monica, known to many of you, is on the Board of Trustees of the American Scandinavian Foundation. Sadly, her collaborator, Sarah Wilford, died just a few weeks ago and is not with us today. And I would like to honor Sarah's legacy by sharing a bit about how this collaboration came to be. Just over a decade ago, Monica invited Sarah to come to Sweden with her. They visited the university, preschools, and public schools in and around Stockholm. And in 2011, Monica brought teachers from Scandinavia to visit the Early Childhood Center and other schools with Sarah Wilford here. 2011 was also the first Nordic Symposium, planned by Sarah and Monica, co-hosted by the American Scandinavian Foundation and by the Child Development Institute at Sarah Lawrence, as a pattern emerged, held at Scandinavia House. And the goal was to bring together educators from the US and Nordic countries to learn from one another and to explore issues of common interest and concern. Symposia followed in 2016 and 2019, co-planned by Monica and Sarah, and in 2019, indeed, Sarah presented a session on early literacy. Not long after that, the college bestowed an honorary doctorate on Sarah Wilford, recognizing her lifelong commitment to children and early childhood development. So I hope that you will join me during today's panel in remembering that rich legacy of Sarah Wilford, thanking Monica Heimbold for her leadership, and exploring with us these critical issues. Thank you again for joining us. Now it's my pleasure to welcome Denise Jones, the director of Sarah Lawrence's Art of Teaching program. Thank you.
Thank you for that warm introduction, Crystal. My name is Denise Jones, and I am the director of the Art of Teaching Graduate Teacher Ed program at Sarah Lawrence College. I'm really excited for today's discussion on teachers of young children and their experience teaching through the pandemic as we continue to live with it and its effects. It's very important that we hear from those who are immediately affected as they try to support the development of children of all ages and their families as well too. I wanted to hear from teachers as COVID began to impact us and the quarantine changed the face of education as we've known it. And I did a survey with Defending the Early Years of over 300 early childhood teachers and families in the spring of 2020 and found out that despite the chaos and the changes and the increase in technology, there were some positives to be seen in the disruption to schooling. There were more close relationships between parents and children. Teachers got to know parents in a different light, and that was also a positive. Some teachers used the opportunity of the pandemic to experiment with more hands-on engaging education and less scripted remote virtual teaching. And so those were all recorded as positives. But we also know it was very stressful for teachers at that time and for families, and it continues to exert stress on our education system, including our childcare system. I engaged with some colleagues to do another survey in the fall of 2020 to really, again, look at the end of the spring 20 year, the reopening plan for fall 2020, and whether teachers felt safe returning to school, given that we were still in such a place with the pandemic where safety was unknown. Over 1,000 teachers responded to that survey from across all 50 states. And Again, we saw the innovation of teachers at the end of the school year and the ways that the relationships with children and parents got better for many. They were able to really use this as an opportunity to get to know students in different ways and to get to know their families better and to build those bonds that are really needed to sustain school community development. And despite all that, there was still a lot of uncertainty in the summer and into the fall. And so we saw that as districts grappled with how to reopen safely, this deeply impacted teachers' sense of stability in the classroom and caused a lot of stress. In addition to the 1,000 teachers that completed the survey, we interviewed about 23 teachers about their experience as well too. And there we got to see a little bit more nuances of how in some communities, it really is about the relationship that the administration had with the teachers, whether they supported them publicly or many saying that they felt thrown under the bus when the teachers did not return to work and there weren't enough numbers to go forward with the school's redistricting plan or reopening plan. And it caused a lot of confusion for many teachers. But despite all of the narrative we heard around learning loss, that never came up, right? That myth never came up in any of the research that I've seen, because that's not what was happening in our schools and our work. Children were being challenged in new ways and they responded amazingly, as they always do, learning new technology, learning new ways to think and to show their learning and be present and engage with others. And of course, teachers did what they always do, which is educate our children. And so there's a lot that we need to learn about the impact of the pandemic and how it will continue to impact us in the future. And that's why I'm delighted that we have our panel discussion today. So thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy this talk.
Thank you, Denise, and thank you to the American Scandinavian Foundation and Child Development Institute at Sarah Lawrence College for this opportunity to come together today and share our experience and insight. My name is Karen Eisenhut, and I am an English teacher at KonTiki Children's School, which is located in Heimbold, Denmark, which is just north of Copenhagen. There is no doubt that COVID-19 pandemic has brought significant disruptions to education around the world and changed the daily practices in our institutions and schools. It is my pleasure today to welcome 4 teachers from the USA, Sweden, and Denmark to share firsthand what teaching has been like within their schools and classrooms. Joining us today will first be Freena Anderson, who is an educator and principal at Framtidsfolket, which are 2 preschools located in a suburb of Stockholm, Sweden. Freena has a bachelor's of social science with a major in international child and youth education and care, and a master's of social science with a major in child and youth education and care. Afterwards, we will hear from Tasnim Azad, who is a kindergarten teacher at the Ella Baker School, a public pre-K to 8th grade school in New York City. Previously, Taz has taught at preschools in a number of private schools in the New York City area. She is also an alumna of Sarah Lawrence College's undergraduate and Art of Teaching programs. Then we will hear from Karina Bech, who is the head of Gladsaxe Skovbørnehave, which is a forest kindergarten located outside of Copenhagen, Denmark. Karina has 15 years of experience as a social educator. She has a bachelor's degree in early childhood and social education and further studies in organizational management. Karina has traveled the world extensively and has lived in Greenland, Denmark, Zambia, Vietnam, and St. Martin. And then to round out our panel today, we'll be joined by Cassandra Santos. She's a lead teacher for the 5 and 6s at the Early Childhood Center at Sarah Lawrence College, a small private preschool in Westchester County, New York. Cassandra began teaching at the Early Childhood Center in 2011 while she was a fieldwork student at Westchester Community College. She continued to work as an assistant teacher at the ECC while she earned her degree in childhood studies from the City College of New York and has continued her graduate studies at the Art of Teaching program at Sarah Lawrence College. Each panelist today will take turns presenting. They'll speak each for about 10 to 15 minutes, and after we will take questions from the audience. So please feel free to type any questions you have into the chat box, and we'll take them at that session after all of our panelists have spoken. So without further ado, let us get this conversation started. And first, I'd please like to welcome Freena Anderson.
Hello, my name is Freena Anderson. I live in Stockholm, Sweden. I'm a principal for 2 preschools, private preschools in the west of Stockholm. There is a larger organization that consists of 7 preschools in the same area, and we're part of a larger school concern. This is what I'm going to talk about. The preschools in Sweden has had open during the whole pandemic. We've tried to work as ordinary as possible. From the government, they told us to follow the curriculum and work as we usually do. But there have been a lot of differences during the last years, and I'm going to share some of them with you today. Starting with the staff. The staff has been extra at risk during the pandemic. They have been exposed to the virus from the parents and from each other and from the children. When the pandemic started, we were supposed to keep the preschools open as usual. Some of the staffs were extra at risk due to their own diseases, but were supposed to attend work as normal as long as they were healthy. And the same goes for the children. As long as they were healthy, they're supposed to attend the preschool. We had no masks for the staffs to wear, not to scare the children. And we're supposed to inform the parents that if the children are healthy, they're supposed to be in preschool, and if they're ill, they stay at home. The regulations in Stockholm has been that if you're ill, you should stay at home and have at least 2 days without symptoms before returning to work or to preschool. And that goes for both staff and children. Now, a year and a half later, most of the staff has been vaccinated, but are still at risk of being contagious from the children. So we have had extra precautions with keeping the distance, do hygiene routines and washing our hands and so on, and keeping the parents outside and trying to keep the staff separate from each other and not gatherings in large groups. Our staff meetings has continued as before. The difference from earlier is that we now haven't been meeting each other in the same room. It's all been on the computer. We've been seeing each other and having meetings with the regular topics, but digital. When we had staff with COVID, we have informed the parents, and the staff had to stay at home with the same regulations as everyone else in the society. If they have symptoms, they have to stay at home and do tests after 1 day to make sure if they're contagious or not. And the families, a lot of parents have been working from home, which has made the days shorter for some of the children. A lot of children have started their days at preschool later and picked up earlier. We had to cooperate with families more closely than before, and at the same time, we had to keep a distance. None of the parents have been allowed inside the preschool since the pandemic started. They had to drop off their children in the morning outside and pick them up outside in the afternoon and try to keep a distance. If they were ill, they could still drop off their children until they had a positive test of COVID. Then the children had to stay at home as well. We have tried to inform the families as much as possible and tried to keep a close cooperation to make sure we do everything we can to make sure no one is exposed to the COVID. All the gatherings we usually have at the preschool at Christmas or in the summer, like parties, we had to put on hold. So we haven't had those since the start. We still have had our development talks, but also during the pandemic, we haven't had them and met each other. We had them we had them on the computer. It worked fine. A lot of parents had the possibility to attend both parents at development talks, and it saved a lot of time for the staff as well. As every year, we have to welcome new families that starts. This year, it's the same as every year. The families attend the preschool. One parent spend time 3 days with their child in the preschool and introduce all the activities and the daily routines. The difference has been that we spend a lot of time outside. We've done more activities outside. We had lunch outside, but we also have been able to let in a few families at a time during these 3 days to make sure that they feel safe to leave their children with us and the children feel safe to stay. Another reason that we don't let the parents enter the preschool is when they go to work, and a lot of them go by public transportations, and we don't know where they spent their day. We don't want them to enter the preschool or expose any of the staff or other families with COVID. We want to minimize the risk to infect others. We had to change some of our routines during the pandemic, especially in the mornings. Some children come for breakfast. They could come in the morning. The rest of the children get dropped off outside. So the parents have to dress them to play outside early in the morning. And the staff had to reorganize what they do in the morning. We have moved a lot of our education and play outside and made the area around the preschool more suitable to do the same educational activities outside as we do inside. We organize smaller groups, we do experiments, we do all the kind of teaching that we do inside as outside as well. We always spent a lot of time outside, even when we had no pandemic, but this has been a lot more organized, and the staff has documented the children's education more outside than they did earlier. Our daily routines, when we eat lunch before the children went to the dining hall and they could put their own food on their plate. Since the pandemic started, the teachers have been putting food on the plates for the children and served. They've been in their departments eating lunch, not in the dining hall. When in all the different times during the day, we wash our hands more regularly now than earlier. And if you don't have water and soap, you use what's the word? Disinfection to make sure their hands are clean. Even the hygiene routines have been a lot more efficient. The teachers tidy a lot more. They disinfect the handles, the toilets, the toys, the tables, the chairs, everything more often than they did before. We have cleaning companies comes in the evening, and they also do more cleaning than they did before. We try to keep our hygiene routines more efficient and often than we did earlier. During diaper changes and when they help the children in the bathrooms, when they serve food, the teachers wear disposable gloves and they tidy a lot afterwards. It's been very time consuming for the staff to rearrange their daily activities and the routines to make sure everything is working. It's been a lot of cooperation between the staff in the department. We tried to not mix the staff from different departments, so they had to keep separated during their breaks, or when inside they couldn't help each other the same. The same in the afternoon, most of the departments go outside so the parents could pick up the children outside in the afternoon. They have to dress all the children so they all are ready to go home, and make sure they have all their stuff and all their things they need to bring home and to school. And there has been some major risks during the whole time. As a principal, I had to make regularly risk assessment. What's the things that could happen? How do we prevent infections to spread? The meetings, when the children meet inside or outside, we have to look over the whole organization. If there is a lot of staff that's been home due to illness, how do we use the staff as efficient as possible and still have the safety in our organization? We haven't been able to hire substitutes as before because we don't want to have anyone from outside enter the preschool. So we had to rearrange the groups depending on the staff. And we had to rely on the parents to early announce to us if they stay home or if they're planning to attend the preschool. Sometimes I had to ask the parents if they had a possibility to keep the children at home if there was a great lack of staff. In my preschools, we haven't had to close down, but in our company, we had a preschool that had so few staff working, we could close down and only let the parents who had jobs to serve the society that were able to have their children at preschool. As a principal, I still, during the whole pandemic, had to ensure the children's right to education. I had to make sure that the teachers had a possibility to teach and that they could follow the curriculum and to document the children's development, that they kept a good communication with the families. And it's been a day-to-day job to make the risk assessment and to make sure that both the education and the safety of the children has been under control. According to the government, everyone has to stay at home 2 days without symptoms before going back to work or to preschool. And in dialogue with the parents, we had to make those decisions quite often. We have parents who send their children while they still have symptoms, and the staff had to call them and ask them to pick their children up to bring them home from preschool. It's been stressful for the staff. And as a principal, I have to make sure that the staff get all the support they need. Together, we also made the decisions to call home or to if the children are healthy or not healthy, if they should be in preschool or if they should stay at home. Sometimes parents have been angry and we had to deal and discuss with the parents to make sure that we do everything we can together to prevent the spread of COVID, which has also been a risk assessment every day. Today, the regulations in Sweden has been let go, lots of them. We haven't had closed down during the whole pandemic, but now a lot of the regulations has been taken away. We still make risk assessment. We realize that we're, or we know all the time, but I think a lot more has realized that we're an important part of the society, and what we do affects both the children and their families and the society around us. We still keep some of our routines. We make sure that all the healthy children are in school, and if you're ill, you should stay at home. We try to keep the parents outside still as much as we can, and we do our hygiene routines. So we don't feel the pandemic is over yet. It's still a close cooperation with the families and the staff. Some part of our routines we've eased up a bit, but we still take a day at a time. We've learned that we're more flexible and help each other and find the possibilities to do things differently than we used to do. And we cooperate a lot more. Staff has helped each other in different ways they didn't do earlier. And that is possible to teach children and see the development outside. The outside environment has been a lot better, improved both by the things we've added to the outside environment and how we use it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rina. We really appreciate your detailed and insights from Sweden. So now we're going to hop over across the pond and have Taz share her experiences from working in a public school in New York City.
Good morning or good afternoon, folks. I'm just going to share my screen. I had some photos to share with you. I love taking pictures in the classroom, so I thought that would help me today. So hi, my name is Taz. I'm a kindergarten teacher at the Ella Baker School. The Ella Baker School is a public school in the US, and by public I mean state-run, state-funded, government-funded school. So my school is under the New York City Department of Education, and so we were taking a lot of our guidance from our school district. The city is broken up into districts by the mayor, who is the head of the school, along with his chancellor that he appoints, and the CDC guidance. So when I was thinking about the start of the pandemic and my teaching personally, I was thinking about how I had just entered my 5th year of teaching that year. And when I had been a beginner teacher, a novice, I remember hearing that your 5th year is the year you become an expert, or you gain some sort of mastery over the grade you're teaching. And so there was no way to really master what we were doing, to something so totally new. And in September, but actually October of 2020, was the first time I returned to my school building after we shut down and things moved totally virtually. We returned to the school building for hybrid learning. This was actually announced pretty late in the summer of 2020. So we weren't really prepared. And so we started totally virtually for, I think it was about a month, where I was meeting my students for the first time and teaching them on Zoom and virtual platforms. And then I finally met my class in person in October, and I had a very different beginning of the school year. So we jumped to remote. We didn't realize we'd be back, and we did it. So we scrambled to put to-go bags together so children would have basic school supplies, notebooks, things to draw and color with. And we started a new platform. A lot of my colleagues used Google Classroom for older grades. As mentioned, my school goes from pre-K to 8th grade. And we tried something called Seesaw, which is very reminiscent of social media for kids. So that's how I assigned schoolwork. And we used Zoom in March of 2020, and we used it again to hold classes. And this time around, things were serious. So we had to have minimum time requirements on Zoom. So I was teaching at least, children were in at least 2 periods, which could be like 15-minute Zoom classes. and I was staggering my classes. So I was on Zoom during these remote learning days for the better part of a day. So we had a lot of safety regulations in place when we returned. That was part of the delay, was to make sure all of these could be in place and all the planning that it took to make this happen. So I had a smaller class for social distancing in the classroom. Masks were required, as they still are, all children, and there's now a vaccine mandate for New York City public school staff, teachers, and everyone who works in the building. But even if you're vaccinated, masks are still required. And then ventilation was a big discussion. So having your windows open, how far are they open, how many windows, having all of our doors open. We had the PTA supplied us with these exhaust fans that they installed. We've been given air purifiers, which are of, I think, suspect efficiency. And there are, our hallways don't have windows, so there's giant fans now blowing air everywhere. And then increased cleaning and disinfection. They have those backpacks where they're spraying disinfectant. They're, extra on top of wiping down tables and hand washing and all of that. So in order to make this stuff happen, such as a smaller class size, I had children on an A-B schedule. So I saw my children 2 to 3 times a week in person, and then 2 to 3 times on Zoom. I'd see the same students. And then there was a cohort of children who stayed home the whole school year. They were totally remote, fully remote, we called it. And so there was all of this spreadsheet sorcery to make sure that everything worked out, where I had the max number of children I could fit in my room with 6 feet distance was, I believe, 9 children and 2 adults. So I saw those 9 children on Zoom, and then I would see them in person along with their remote friends. So sorry if I'm confusing you. It was so much to coordinate at the time. And so, yeah, small classes didn't mean more teachers or more classrooms. It meant we had to make do with the resources we always had. Typically in a New York City public school kindergarten, the class cap is 25. So usually I would have maybe 22 or 23 students every year. And so this is how it worked ideally. We would be at our tables with 6 feet distance, and the tables would be spread out. I had to eliminate my meeting area to make this work. I had to kind of minimize how many materials I had and get rid of shelves or push them away. But going into the school year, we knew that this would be really tricky for children to social distance, and the guidance changed frequently. It's still changing, masks required, masks not required in public, inside, outside. And so now we know that masks, or we know that masks are the greatest tool we have when distance is not possible. But at the time, it was very nerve-wracking to think that I was responsible for these small children who I knew developmentally would want to finally hug their friends or hug me or get close to collaborate. So yeah, we tried our best with that. Eventually it changed to 3 feet, so I was able to welcome a few more students into my classroom, but we stayed small for the year. Because I had so few students, the mask mandate seemed fairly simple. It was easy to remind children or talk to them about comfort and remind them and have these intimate conversations about why we were doing this extraordinary thing all together. I was just kind of tickled by this image. I work in a building that is at least 100 years old. And so people were saying that perhaps they're not as well ventilated as newer buildings. And then the union released this video showing that, like, this image comes from that our buildings were made in the time of Spanish flu and all that sort of stuff, and tuberculosis. And so they had the ventilation systems in place and they fell into disrepair. So it took at least a year. I believe my ventilation system was active operating this September. So they'd been working on that for a long time to get that working. So air was being stale air was being sucked out on all that through my vents. And then the picture, we're not getting ready for recess here. We're just very cold when it's December and January and February in New York City in our classroom, and the windows are open. And mentally, that's the thing making us feel safe, is that airflow and that chill. And so children are layered up in my classroom just to feel that we're doing the most we can for these kids. And so, as I mentioned, we had our virtual classroom. At some point, you know, I'm someone that really embraces technology and feels savvy with technology. This image is from a field trip we took. We weren't able to leave the school for trips, which is so important to me in kindergarten. So we were able to connect with Brooklyn Bridge Park and meet some of their animals. And so there were so many things that were unique, and I felt like I was learning. Yet at some point, the image over here reminds me how burnt out I felt in January of 2020, February of 2020, or 2021, sorry, earlier this year. Time just isn't a warp. It became so hard for me to, you know, I really loved being home. I loved commuting. I loved taking care of myself on remote learning days, but it was very challenging to be on Zoom with young children, learning how to mute and unmute themselves, children who are in bed, children who just don't come to the meetings, and feeling that I wanted to be flexible and patient with them, but and my school has supported that, but at large in the city, this feeling that children needed to be in school no matter what that meant. And so there were so many silver linings, though, to having this small class. We have a choice time called work time, and work time could flourish. I could do things that I always find so challenging, like sewing projects. I think kids love this sort of work, but I find it daunting because it's not a personal hobby of mine. So I felt that I could take time and learn it myself, and the children could teach each other very easily, and that we had opportunities to explore things and try things that I can't quite do with 20 plus students. Like Rina said, I wrote we were flexible, but I think we tried our best to be flexible. I had to remind myself that as guidance changed, we could start incorporating things again. So I never quite started cooking and baking in my classroom again, but we made smoothies and we tried to find ways that we could just try new things. And we knew that, you know, we're not going to catch COVID from sharing food, even though that was maybe a fear early on. It was unfounded, so let's go ahead and share some food together and make each other some food. We had a end of the year celebration outdoors, and you know, different people were in different PPE, whatever they felt comfortable with, but it just felt so welcome to finally see each other again and finally invite families to enjoy this time with us. The smaller class size meant that I could give my students individual attention. I felt like I knew these 8 children, 9 children very well. And I could do projects like this planting project where I would invite one at a time and I could help them. And we could take as much time as we needed, because even with a shorter school day, which was something we did, I had a lot of time for them, and I could pull a small group and know that the rest of the class was a small group that could probably take care of themselves by you know, doing some independent activities. We're in the Upper East Side, which is not known for, you know, large green spaces, but we had an outdoor space that we could use, a large asphalt yard. And this image is, we found, I believe it was like a sparrow was hanging out on a fence. And I don't know if that sparrow would have been so close to us if there were hundreds of children in the yard, but with this hybrid schedule, we had such small classes, and maybe in the building we had something like 50 or 60 children at a time instead of 300 plus students. So there were these, you know, special moments that came about being outside. One coping mechanism that I have is running. And so also because of the small school size, I felt like I could pilot a running program through the Rising New York Roadrunners. And I kind of broke out of my small class. You know, at some point it felt like this class is very small and there's still other students that I'd love to connect with. So I was able to do a kindergarten to like 3rd or 4th grade running club, and we'd meet early in the mornings. And it was a space that we could gather communally across grades because we were outdoors and enjoying some physical exercise together. And just something very funny and unique about this year was that I had student teachers who I have never met in person still. We worked totally remotely, and at some point we had to say goodbye to our student teacher in the spring because we were no longer on Zoom. These children returned to school 5 days a week in April, and so did I. And so we connected with our student teacher Supriya on FaceTime, and children would read to her or talk to her at lunchtime. And so I just wanted to share this goodbye video that we made for Supriya.
Thank you, Supriya. I love you. Bye, Supriya. I miss you. I love you because I want to do scientist research.
I just wanted to share those messages because I just thought it was so sweet that these children never met this woman, probably saw her for at maximum 5 to 10 minutes a day, and felt so connected and close to her with what we were able to do using technology. And so thinking forward, I'm thinking about, it's so easy to get wrapped up in the challenges and spiral with how difficult it is teaching right now. But I feel like we're at a time where we have choices, not just us, but you know, the people in charge have choices about where we take this now. And so, of course, the small classes, I'm back to having a max of 24 children with 3 feet distance in my classroom. So my class is currently 20 kids in kindergarten, and it's still a relief that it's relatively small, but I know that our teachers union is pushing to keep small class sizes for young children and all children. In other grades, the cap could be something like 30 or 35 students in a class. And so just thinking about how valuable that could be to have a small class where children could get the attention that they need. We're also at a moment where there's a lot of conversation about how you know, children are behind. They're falling behind because of what they lost, learning loss during the pandemic. And I want to choose relationships with children and getting to know children and building community over this data and assessment. Right now, I'm being asked to assess children's social, emotional learning and their social skills and collect data on that and fill out a questionnaire. And I'd rather keep the small classes and get to know them and get to know what they need. And I'm thinking about what place technology has for very young children. This is another image from my trip. And so the facilitator was showing us some creatures. And then later I got an email from a family that showed me, you know, what their son made in response. And they worked with some clay and made this millipede. And just what a beautiful thing when parents can be more engaged in their children's learning because they're literally a part of some of it, and how I'm able to get to see other parts of my classes because of, you know, the time we spend together or what I see them working on at home. Children live in virtual worlds. I feel like there are things that should still be sacred. Right now, snow days and recently our election day was a asynchronous learning day. So school was technically, the buildings were closed, but school was open. And that's the plan for snow days. And I feel like those things should not be messed with. We should find moments for peace and remove ourselves from the grind at some point. But children live in these worlds. I hear a lot of children talking about their iPad games and video games and shows they love. And I don't think schools should have to compete for the attention of children, but I think we could learn something about how they engage with these platforms. This is the direction of the world, and I think we provide respite from it, but I think we could also complement and enhance learning by thinking about how these things can benefit relationships with real people and still have space for the communities of peers in person for hugs and wrestling and rolling around, and materials that they can touch and feel and see in real dimensions. But I think that there is a way for us to continue this conversation and not just leave it behind as the world changes. Thank you.
Taz, thank you so much. We really appreciate, despite the challenges, that you could highlight so many successes and help us look forward to the future despite the pandemic. So thank you so much. And now we're going to move on and we'll have Karina join us, who is working at Gladsaxe Forest Kindergarten in Denmark.
Hello, everybody. I will share the screen as well. We are situated just outside Copenhagen. We have approximately 45 children aged between 3 and 6 years old. We have 3 age groups with two teachers for each group. Usually we are outside all day, also before the COVID, and it doesn't matter whether it's winter or summer or anything. The opening hours is from 7 in the morning, and before COVID we were inside in the morning, but after COVID we were outside all day. I think you need to know a little about what we do in a forest kindergarten. Okay, as I was talking about, what we do out in the forest is probably the same thing you could do inside, being inside a house all the time. We do projects mainly, like we could have a project about a circus or pirates or something, and try to use all the goals we need to go through due to the curriculum. But that we could do after the COVID as well. So we could do the same thing, and the children didn't have to wear a mask or anything. We had a complete lockdown for 1 month. And at that time, the children were home all the time. There were no teams or any teaching at all for that month. But instead, the teachers were planning what to do when we had to home again. After that, we opened, and the children had to be in small groups of 5 to 6 children for 1 adult. Later on, had the bigger groups like they normally are in. There were not any restrictions for the children within the group. They could hug and they could play as they used to. We had to keep distance from the parents later on, but they could stay in, the children could stay in designated areas. So we had to make some lines for the children to stay behind these lines with like a string or something. And the children had to play within the group. We had less toys and more nature materials they used. And then we had boxes with toys which had to be sanitized and they could use it for role plays or find animals or bugs or whatever they want. And then of course the children had to do more frequently hand wash and use sanitizers. For the teachers there were more restrictions, but still no face masks. We wanted to let the children see our faces, to see our emotions and when we talked, they could easily understand what we said. So it was not allowed for us to wear masks at all. We could wear shields though, but they fucked up when you are outside all the time. It's cold, so we couldn't see anything, and we couldn't use it. We were, of course, very aware of the hygiene, and we did to sanitize everything, and had to keep distance, especially to the parents and each other. And it was very important to keep on hugging and comforting the children all the way through the COVID and all the rules. We had to keep track of all the contacts. So when we saw children playing together, we had to make sure who had been playing together. So if there were any children sick, or then we had to know who they had been playing with. So that's still the main thing we use at the moment. They can all of them can be together. They don't have to stay in their groups at the moment. But we have to keep an eye on them and see how who they play with. That's very important for us at the moment. We also had to have meetings on Teams on the computer, both between the teachers and parents when needed. And if we inside, the children would had to stay in their small groups as well. And we had to open the windows and doors sometimes when it's very rainy for a very long time. There was also restrictions for the parents. Of course, they had to use the hand sanitizer when they entered the kindergarten's garden, and they had to keep behind the marked lines. They had to keep distance, and for some time they had to use face masks if they got inside, but usually they had to stay outside all the time. Because we are kindergarten and go to the forest all the time, the children already had the proper clothing, which was quite easy for the parents to make sure they came in the proper clothing in the morning. So it was, much easier. We talked a lot about what have been working well, and we have been making a survey for the parents. They answered it in June 20, and they thought it was everything was well organized. There was things they didn't like that much, especially the social thing, that they couldn't talk together and they had to stay apart. You don't talk and small talk when you are like 1 or 2 meters apart, but something worked very well for us all. What worked well was the nudging. We had to plan very well how we could get the parents to do the things we want, and we made the lines on the ground, which made it easier. And we made also places where the children could dress and undress their what do you call it, the outer clothes. If the parents have forgotten some raincoat or something, they could put it on outside. It's also been working very well with the Teams meetings with the parents, and the smaller fixed groups also work very well, because you get very close connection with the children. Another thing which has been very easy for us is the farewell situation, where the children have to, when they get dropped off, we made like a kiss and fly zone, or we call it kiss and goodbye. The parents had to hurry a little because there were big lines, and they had to say goodbye very quick. And the children knew that it was like that, and the parents knew it was like that. So everything went well, and there was much easier farewells, and we would like to continue that as well. Another thing is we still use, and which have been working well, it was that the teachers was in designated areas, so the parents could easily find them. Like that, we have had a classroom outside, so the parents knew where to go and where to find the teachers. And we have been trying to make as few changes as possible. Even though some of the restrictions went away for a while, we didn't change so much because we might worry that they would come back. And then we tried to keep on to some of the restrictions. It could be like having the teachers in the same areas so the parents could find them, and not splitting the groups or connecting the groups too much. We will keep doing some of the things we have been done. We will still keep delivering the children outside. It's been working very well. So we continue this after the COVID, and also Teams meetings with parents we continue with. Also, having toys packed in boxes has been working very well. So we have like a where we can collect the toys easily and find things, asking the children what they like to play with, and they can go and get a box at a time. We have been like quarantined the boxes for more than a week. So we have a lot of toys. We had to buy a lot of toys in order to do this. Then we didn't have to wash toys that much. And also we tried letting the children help washing the toys. So yeah, we will still have to keep the changes at a minimum, because it's I think the numbers are rising again. So we'll try to do what we can do best. That's what I have at the moment.
Thank you so much, Karina. Now we're going to transition and hear from Cassandra Santos, who is the lead teacher for the 5s and 6s at the Early Childhood Center at Sarah Lawrence College.
Thank you, Karen. So, hi, I'm Cassandra. I teach at the Sarah Lawrence Early Childhood Center, and the Early Childhood Center is a small independent school located on the Sarah Lawrence College campus, which provides progressive child-centered education for children 2 to 6 years old. And I am the lead teacher for the 5-6s class, which is a combined kindergarten and first grade class. And I've been in that role for the past 3 years. So the pandemic first struck in March of 2020 when I was halfway through my very first year as the lead teacher for the 5-6s. And from the moment we first closed our doors up until now, the staff at the Early Childhood Center began planning for ways to work around the limitations imposed by a pandemic. And we didn't know at first just how widespread and long lasting this pandemic would be. But when we realized we would be in it for the long haul, we quickly brainstormed ways to bring our community together digitally to give the children some sense of normalcy and connection. So we set up hour-long Zoom sessions in which we sang to the children or read stories or had dance sessions with the college dance movement therapy classes. We recorded and shared stories and videos of teachers reading stories. And we finished out the 2020 school year online, happy that with what we had accomplished, but knowing that it would not be sustainable in the long term. And over that summer, we met frequently as a staff to brainstorm ways to return to school in a way that would keep us and our students and our community safe, while also providing the sort of engaging and experiential and developmentally appropriate education that we value so much for young children. And at times it was really disheartening. Every time we looked at the news, we were met with reports and op-eds about what school would look like in the fall. Would children go in person or be remote or do a hybrid version? And how would teachers be safe? And how could we keep the parents and the children safe? And it was a lot to think about and a lot of logistics to work through. And it was very tricky. And it takes a lot of thoughtful planning to pull off having a school year during a pandemic. We wanted to be safe and hygienic, and we wanted the families to feel safe leaving their children with us. So using the best information we had available to us at the time and focus on what we valued most for the children, it was decided that the best route forward was to close the younger classes for the year and only open up the 5-6s for in-person school. And we considered how the virus was spread and what we learned from the experts at the CDC and the World Health Organization. And we knew that outdoor spaces were safest for masked individuals to gather. And we also knew that as a community, we didn't feel good about all the images that we were seeing of young children behind plexiglass desks, cut off from each other in classrooms at an age in which social interactions and play are the best ways for them to learn. And we wanted the children to be able to interact with each other and feel safe with each other, and wanted families to feel safe and secure sending their children to us. So we used the best available scientific information we had available to us from the CDC and New York State guidelines and the guidelines from Sarah Lawrence College as well. And we set up an outdoor classroom for our first semester of the 2020-2021 school year, which runs from September to December for the first semester. And we're fortunate enough that we had a large enough outdoor space that we had enough space for 20 by 20 square foot tent in our yard, and still plenty of outdoor playground space. When we thought carefully about the sort of materials that we wanted to use, like the things that are hallmarks of the 5-6s education, like art supplies and blocks, and how we could incorporate them into an outdoor space. And we knew we wanted to have books and notebooks and pencils and paper and all the sorts of things that the children would be used to from an indoor classroom. But we also had to consider what the outdoor elements would mean for ease of use. And we had to think about how to limit shared materials like manipulatives and art supplies, and how the children would be able to play together while keeping their tools separate. We also spent many, many hours thinking about daily setup and cleanup and sanitation and hygiene practices, and how we could carry all of those tasks in the midst of each school day. So we also needed to think about what would happen if anyone got COVID-19 during the school year. We knew we'd have to close down and quarantine. And should that happen, we had to have a backup plan for remote learning. So at the same time that I was setting up our outdoor classroom, I was setting up at-home kits with journals and art supplies and math materials for possible online learning. And I began planning what I hoped would be engaging and fun lessons that we could do as a group online in the event that we would close. And at that same time, all the planning logistics of space and setup and sanitation, the biggest concern of mine was the children, the people that we were doing all this for. I was so concerned about what they would be thinking and feeling when they came back to school. They had all been through a tough experience the year before. They had roughly left school in the middle of the week the previous year and never returned. They learned that the place and the people that they've grown to feel secure and safe around were no longer safe to be around because of this pandemic. They couldn't leave their homes or see their friends or members of their communities. And all of the adults around them were certainly confused and overwhelmed. And I know it must have had a big impact on how they viewed the world outside of their homes. And I was worried about how the children would react to being back in school with other children and possibly the first adults they've seen outside their parents in 6 months. And I wanted them to feel like school was a safe place where they could relax and have fun and play and learn and be with other children. I was worried about how they would feel about daily temperature checks at drop-off and a list of confusing and possibly scary questions I had to ask their parents each morning before they could come into our schoolyard. I wanted them to know that I would take care of them and listen to them and help them whenever they needed. And I didn't want them to be scared, but I can't control that. Their feelings were theirs to have. And as much as I wanted them to think of school as a safe place, I knew I couldn't force it. I knew it would take a lot of work to establish a sense of trust and security with the children and their families. And I would have to trust that with time, things would smooth out. But it was my biggest anxiety, even more so than the fear of getting COVID-19. Well, when the children finally did come back, I was pleasantly surprised. I spent many sleepless nights worrying over their presumed anxieties, only to be met with children who were so happy and thrilled to be back in school. I set up meetings with them on Zoom before they came to meet me so they could meet me without a mask. I then met with each child and their families individually in person, as I do each year before school starts, but this time it was outside in our tent classroom. And they were in love with having an outdoor classroom. They thought it was so cool that they got to go to school in a tent and that they could have outdoor time all day. And they knew they had to wear a mask all day, and they were fine with that. In the beginning, they loved the idea of taking a mask break, and it took them frequently, but the novelty quickly wore off when they realized that they had to be alone to do so and couldn't play with their friends, because that's what they really wanted and needed: togetherness, connection, interaction with their peers and teachers. While I was in the midst of it, having an outdoor classroom was overwhelming and a constant source of stress in the back of my head. But now that I'm almost a year removed, I realized that much of the experiences of the 5-6s was about the same. We were able to do all the things that count. We still had our morning meetings and story time, and the children were still able to have playtime and make use of the materials in the space. We were even able to do some academic work, although that couldn't always be a priority, with wind blowing papers away or rain wetting notebooks, or sometimes cloudy days making the tent too dark to see at times. But the children are able to fall into routines that may have been slightly out of the normal, but it was our new normal. Canceling math workshop or word study because rain and wind made it impossible to keep our materials organized was more of a big deal to me than it was to them. They were way more flexible and adaptable than I originally gave them credit for. It was me who needed to let go of the strict schedules and learn to take big changes in stride. And I learned that in order for the children to feel safe and relaxed in school, I needed to model that I felt the same. And over time, I did learn to relax, following the children's lead and trusting that they would tell me what they needed. They didn't necessarily need a phonics or a math lesson every day, and they didn't need to worry whether or not they would be prepared academically for the next school year. They needed a place to be with their friends and their teachers, where they could learn in ways that felt natural and fun to them. And they needed a teacher who saw this experience through their eyes, who would do what they could to make the school a place where they could have these joyful experiences, engaging conversations, and time to create and make mistakes and learn from each other. And that's overall what they were able to do. I'd like to share with you some photos of our time together. And you can see that these children were able to have so many normal experiences in our outdoor classroom. They were able to still have normal interactions with each other and play together. They had conversations to work with each other in the same way they would do in an indoor classroom. They are able to do academic work some days, and on days that we couldn't, and we were okay with that. They are able to make use of both the tent and the yard with ease, and they established on their own different spaces for playing and reading and story times and relaxing. They were still able to find the quiet spaces they needed when they wanted to be alone. And they made use of the materials in much the same way they would have indoors. And sometimes it looked a little bit different than what indoor drawing would look like, but they made the most of it. They were able to work and play in groups individually and make connections with their teachers. And they were able to make connections with each other. And they still had plenty of opportunities to do the things that you would normally do in kindergarten, whether you're inside or outside. They had plenty of opportunities to be messy and plenty of opportunities to be creative and to build and make structures from blocks and play with cars and trucks and dig in the sandbox and create things from loose parts and paint and make structures. And they were able to spend time quietly alone or together. And that's what they really craved, was the connections with each other, whether it was playing actively together, or sitting side by side while reading stories. And we use our outdoor space much in the same way that we would during the school year, but we just had plenty more time in it. And we are also able to take advantage of this big empty college campus that we had at our disposal and take walks around the campus, and climb trees, and see different buildings that we normally wouldn't get to see, or that if we did get to see them, would be overwhelming and crowded with college students. But this space, we got to take ownership over it. We still had our regular story times and meetings. And we got to use that outdoor space and take advantage of the weather. And we learned to appreciate the weather for what it was and not focus on the limitations of a rainy day or a cold day, but we focused on the opportunities for play and exploration that the weather provided. And we engaged in nature more so than we had in the past. And we really took advantage of our outdoor space and learned how to care for it and care about our environment, and had a lot of opportunities for learning about nature and the natural world. And we also use it to just play and throw leaves and jump in piles. And even if that meant that we had to be cold or messy for a while, and throughout this whole school year, we learned that, you know, the weather and, you know, the nature is not a limitation, but something to be embraced and to work our ways around. So we did end up going inside our school building for the second semester from January through June, when the weather became too cold and unpredictable to sustainably continue outdoor school. So coming back to school after our winter break was like starting the school year all over again. We had to reestablish routines and needed a different set of rules for the indoor space than we did for the outdoor space. And there was, of course, the safety logistics to consider and what it would mean to be acceptably socially distanced and still allow the children to have natural, developmentally appropriate interactions, sanitizing procedures, meal times behind plexiglass dividers, and all the other details that I needed to be constantly concerned with in the midst of an ongoing pandemic. But there are also a lot of lessons that I learned about letting go of what I could not control and embracing what I could. The children once again quickly adapted to being in school again, happy to see their friends after a long winter break. And the new rules were a challenge at first, but we eventually settled as we would have in any normal school year. Being indoors brought a new level of stability to our routine and our daily structure, but there were still times when we needed to be flexible and make changes, but I was now okay with that. It wasn't suddenly easy for me to let go of the structure and routines despite the lessons I learned in the first semester, but it was easier. And it took a lot of self-reflection and revisiting of my values as a teacher and reminding myself what was most important for the children. As winter ended, we did end up spending most of our days outdoors again, but we still had daily time in our classroom. And we valued each space equally and appreciated all the opportunities that each environment offered. While the children are adapting quite well to being in school, there was another piece to the school year that would take some time to figure out. The Early Childhood Center is a close community of teachers, children, and families. In the past, we've had plenty of opportunities for families to gather outside of school hours to support our small community. We had family nights and fall festivals, and parents were welcomed in the classroom. This school year, we had to consider the pandemic safety protocols, and there were not many opportunities for face-to-face interaction with parents. We had to do our back to school night over Zoom, which was a bit of a challenge. Typically, parents come into the classroom, look around, see what their children are working on and how they're using the space. And the face-to-face time with the families goes a long way in establishing trusting and open relationships. The families would also be able to interact with each other in person and get to know each other in a way that was difficult for them through Zoom meetings in which I was the central focus. I was able to have a few face-to-face outdoor parent-teacher conferences with individual families, but most opted to meet over Zoom and never had the opportunity to be in their child's classrooms, outdoors or indoors. There's also the fact that my class was the only class operating in the ECC that year, and most of the college's classes were operating online. Typically, I would have different college students from the graduate and undergraduate classrooms come to do fieldwork in my classroom, which we were unable to allow for safety's sake as we were trying to limit the amount of people in our bubble. I missed the diversity of experience and personality and strengths that the college students brought to the room. And I missed the camaraderie and support of the other ECC teachers. That's not to say that I was completely alone in this work. I was able to have 3 amazing graduate assistants who I would not have been able to make it through the year without. My director was always nearby and able to help out in a classroom and give more of her time to me than she would have typically been able to. And I was able to collaborate with the college's dance movement program, whose director and graduate students provided engaging online weekly movement sessions for the 5-6s. And the Art of Teaching graduate students also provided weekly online play and story sessions with the kids as part of their field experience. And they were able to form meaningful connections with the children over Zoom. The parents also worked so hard to figure out their role in a community that year. They began to organize backyard play dates with each other and FaceTime calls between their children. And even though they couldn't come into the classroom, they would do Zoom calls on their children's birthdays to participate in our class birthday circles. And though it was tricky, we were able to embrace our community for what it was and what it had to be that year. It was smaller and there were more restrictions on our interactions, but we were able to make the best of what the circumstances limited us to. On the last week of school, as most of the adults in our community began to get vaccinated, we were able to finally be able to gather in person in our backyard for an end of the year celebration. And we were able to be with each other in a way that we desired all year. And it was such a joyous occasion for the children and families and teachers. And I thought that it was well worth the wait. Right now, I'm back in a classroom with a little bit of a more normal routine, though it's not the same as it was pre-pandemic. We are back to an average size class for me, which this year is 13 students. And we're having our regular indoor schedule, and we're still masked and having distance meals outside. But we are more relaxed about materials and face-to-face interactions, but we are still mindful about how COVID spreads in our interactions. And I'm using the lessons that I learned last year about how to be flexible and how to embrace our community for what it is rather than what I want it to be. And we're taking full advantage of all of our spaces, indoor and out, and our moments with each other. And with all the stress and fear and joy and learning we went through last year, I know that I'm a better teacher for it. And I'm grateful that my current students get this version of me. And I know that this year and each year to come will have its unique sets of challenges that I'm prepared to embrace and learn from, just how I embraced and learned from the pandemic year of having an outdoor classroom. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cassandra. That was wonderful. We've been full of presentations that have been so interesting and informative, and I've really enjoyed hearing all the similarities and differences between the countries. But also I want to thank our panelists for being so honest about the struggles and challenges, yet still recognizing their flexibility and creativity and their resilience and the successes that they've all been able to have through this time. I'm going to ask all our panelists to come back on the screen and join us. We'll continue with a few questions. We are right about up at the time that we had originally scheduled, but we'll take some questions and we'll end up going a little bit of overtime. If there's any of the attendees that can't stay with us for this overtime, this recording will be posted online. You'll be able to stream it from the Scandinavian House YouTube channel. So if you have to leave, you'll be able to see it later and catch some of our questions. So the first question I'm going to ask, Rina, there was a specific question for you asking about when the Swedish preschools stayed open and had no masking, what kind of COVID rates did they have? So I think this question is trying to ask if you could talk a little bit more about what you saw. Were there any impacts you saw about your students or your children not having masks on, and did that increase any outbreaks that you saw at your institution or not?
We didn't have that many staff that was infected with COVID. In Sweden, we don't test preschool children still, unless now they started if there is COVID in the family. So I'm not sure. the last year, we didn't have that many infections at all. No colds, no stomach flu, nothing. So I think both the staff and the children were more healthy when attending preschool. Of course, I had lack of staff. They were home due to minor colds, but not many that was infected with COVID. So it was less infections than a normal year during the winter, especially.
Yes, definitely. And I think, as we've heard from all the panelists, this is a big difference in the approaches from the US versus Scandinavia, of whether to have masks or not. And maybe if any of the other panelists want to share if there were any other, from your experience, whether your children had masks or not, do you feel that this has been a good thing to continue with? Do you wish they had them or not, or vice versa? Is there anyone else that wants to make any comments about that?
I noticed that with the mask, we had the opposite. We ended up having less colds and flus and sickness in general because we were masked and the kids weren't spreading as many germs. Also, with all of our constant hand washing routines, and even for myself, I normally get a fall cold and a winter cold and an early spring cold. And because we were all masked and there was less germ spreading in the air, none of us were really out with colds. I think maybe one child had a pretty severe cold in that year. But other than that, I feel like, previous years we had, seen a lot of sickness, especially around the winter time, that we didn't see this year. And I think that's in large part due to the mask and the frequent hand washing.
Yeah. And Karina, you also had a hand up, or maybe something you wanted to add?
I think it's similar. We didn't have any cases at all with the COVID, not for the teachers or for the children at all. So the mask or not, it didn't matter anyway. So, or I don't know, but we didn't have cases, and no colds and flus and anything at the same time. So they've been very healthy as well. The teachers had to be tested for some times during, I think it was in the late summer 20, because they had a little of coughing, and they had to be at home for a while. Some of them had been close contacts as well, so they had to be home as well. So it was not that easy sometimes to plan and organize the adults and the teachers around the children, but otherwise it's been okay.
Yeah. And just one follow-up on that, we had just another question come in. Cassandra, are the children wearing masks outside at Sarah Lawrence this year still?
Yes, we're still wearing masks indoors and outdoors at school, except for meal times, and our meal times are outside, and the children eat in the yard on yoga mats that are 6 feet distance. So anytime that we are unmasked, we are socially distanced. On days where we have our meals inside because of rain or it's too cold or windy, they sit 2 to a 6 foot table spread apart in a classroom with all the windows open.
Great. And Rina, there was one other question that was targeted towards you. You had mentioned of some of the changes that you made to the outdoor environment in Sweden at your schools. Could you elaborate a little bit more about what those changes specifically were?
I think, just as Karina said, we added more boxes outside with toys and with crafts and things to do outside. We made a lot of more places where we had meetings, and we had circle time. We brought out more books, and we had the same kind of activities as we have indoor with blocks, and you paint and you do clay and everything outside. And the regular activities which we usually do outside, running games and outdoor games, the staff had more observations of the educational part of the outdoor games than they had before the pandemic.
And are you still continuing some of these activities even as regulations have been eased?
Yeah, we do. and we try to combine to not see the difference between indoor and outdoor activities as we did before. So you could follow up the education outside as well as inside.
Great. And Karina, there's a question for you. If you have any favorite outdoor activities that stand out in your program, maybe specifically also unique to being a forest kindergarten that you'd like to share with our attendees.
You can actually do anything you want. We haven't changed a lot. The role play, like you said, painting and drawing, and you can do anything. Of course, we have to have a roof somewhere in the garden where we can sit underneath if you want to paint or draw or something or play games. It's more it's like more comforting, like not being under heavy rain or things like that. But we don't have any special things we do. You can do anything.
Wonderful, thank you. And this will a question I'll open up to all the panelists. A lot of you touched upon some of the successes or some of the hopes that you have for the future as we still kind of juggle through as the pandemic continues. But do you feel, can you touch upon anything that you have gained personally or professionally, or maybe also what you feel the children have gained from all of this, or their families? Just some highlights from each of your schools or institutions.
I can say the flexibility among the staff to make decisions a bit faster and to change what they have in mind the first time to change into something else, and to communicate more the departments together.
Yes.
Not so afraid of making changes and step away from the ordinary schedule.
I have to agree with what Rina said. For me, a big thing that year was learning how to be flexible. And in the past, I'd always considered myself a flexible person, only to learn that I wasn't. And it was very hard to learn that about myself. But, you know, I learned to embrace what positive outcomes could come from, like an abrupt change in plans and schedules, and I embrace the opportunities that come with it. I remember a specific instance when I had a certain lesson planned with writing or reading or some sort of fun. The lesson's not even important at that moment, but it was raining and the water kept coming into the tent and the wind was blowing and papers were getting wet and we couldn't do it. And I was very stressed out about it. But the kids took that time to use the materials that we did have to try to create a barrier to keep this puddle of water that kept seeping in at the edge of the tent. And they started making barriers and trying to block this water from coming in. And they were experimenting with all types of science and physics and math in that moment. And they were learning so much. And I was very stressed that we couldn't do this lesson that I had planned and this thing that I wanted to teach them. And they were learning. And so I really learned how to embrace all these opportunities for learning and teaching and growing that come outside of the strict schedule.
Great. There is one specific question that had come in, and then also if there's any other last remarks, but I could interrupt here and just, Taz, there is a specific question that has come in for you. They're asking, when they hear about children falling behind, it concerns that schools are continuing to be bound by the curriculum. Have you seen any modifications in New York? Or also they want to know what you might think will make things different in the New York City public schools after all of this.
Well, I feel like for the first question, I feel lucky that I work at a school where the focus is on children and not curriculum, and curriculum is the support that we use, the guidance that we use the materials that help us think about how to bring social skills and play and reading and writing and math to the kids. But I just think it's so unique to individual communities, whether the focus is on test scores or getting into that next, in the New York City school system, children apply to middle school, they apply to high school, and then inevitably to colleges. So there is this race for some folks. And I guess to lead into like, what will it take? I think it takes us, the many. It takes not just teachers coming together, but parents coming together, the children who are old enough to advocate and to say that these are the things that really matter to us, that it's not top down. But, I work at the Ella Baker School. She was a civil rights organizer and leader and really believed in the power of young people and the power of grassroots movements. I don't think we can just in the shadows say, I'm resisting this, which is sometimes what I'm able to do when I shut my classroom door is like I resist and I don't do the assessment, or I help the children with it and I use it as a tool and not as, the standard. And I think, we need to come together and there needs to be a wider conversation about just what we talked about. What are the things that we can take away that are positives and not just be fearful of what's lost.
Great, thank you. We have some last minute questions coming in, but unfortunately we are running out of time. So I would just like to close with having our panelists think of maybe, is there any advice that you have to other educators out there? I know we have heard of some of the struggles and triumphs that you've had through this, and I don't think we're fully out of it yet, but is there any advice to educators or children or their families that they can take going forward from all of your experiences? If everyone wants to just say one thing.
I believe the cooperation between families and preschools or schools are very important, that you have a good relationship and a good dialogue, both for the best of the children during education, but also the health.
I think it's important when we're so worried about what our kids are getting out of education and are they getting the most, that, teachers and parents need to follow the lead of the children and trust that they are going to tell you and show you what it is that they need from you in that moment, and live in the now and not be so worried about what's going to come in the future.
I was thinking about the emotional well-being of the children. I think it's very important to consider that during this COVID epidemic, because there are so many worries at the time, all the time, and the children and for the parents, it's been one of the biggest issues also for the teachers. And for the parents, it's also meeting other parents and talking with other parents to make sure the children are happy and still have friends. That's the most important.
I think there is some conversation in the city about how the city was prioritizing restaurants and concerts and things like that over schools, and hearing like the children showing us, just seeing how, and hearing from all of you, how much children just loved coming back to school, how separation anxiety kind of became just like less present for us because school was just the center of their social world. So just placing the value there is so important.
Great. Thank you all so much, especially to our panelists who contributed today. Thank you all for taking the time, and thank you again to the American Scandinavian Foundation and the Child Development Institute at Sarah Lawrence College. It was a wonderful opportunity, so many informative presentations, and I hope this conversation can continue and that we can continue to collaborate and share ideas and help each other and continue forward as we educate. So thank you once again, and I hope you all have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.